Hi, this is Coach Redpill, and this is the Coach and Benway show. I'm joined with my co-host, Dr. Benway. Say hello, Dr. Benway.
How's it going, guys?
And we're going to be talking about Chinese population of all things, but it's actually really interesting. Benway, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So, as per usual with interesting stories, I was perusing Zero Hedge, as some of you might be want to do. And as you probably know, just give a little context for this, China has for a long time dealt with, shall we say, a population volume issue. And one of the ways that they tried to manage that, going way back, I think, to the Mao era, I could be wrong, was this idea that, one family, one child policy with an intent to kind of really contract the demographics here.
Oh, yeah. No, the one child policy was way back from the 60s, I believe.
Yeah. So it was a Maoist policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was tied into the Cultural Revolution, but I could be wrong. But it was way back there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought it was. So anyway, go on that path. Makes sense that they do that. And then we get to a time where China is a economic powerhouse, and oops, that might be a challenge to us. And lo and behold, I now read an article that's titled "No Longer Reversible: China's Low Fertility Rate and Birth Restrictions Set Stage for Disaster." No, I like kind of jumpy titles like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of Zero Hedge, that they're like, the end of the world is now. Pictures at 11, But anyway, so what does it say? I mean, what numbers does it throw out?
Yeah, so I'll throw. I think these must come from. Looks like they come from they're referencing the Wall Street Journal. So here's their first clip they give. China's clinging to birth restrictions defies a clear demographic trend. Its workforce is shrinking, and the population is rapidly aging. Not surprising. A lot of people are feeling that. By 2050, there will be 1.3 workers for each retiree, according to the official estimates, compared with 2.8 now. So it looks like it's getting cut in half.
Oh, by what year?
By 2050.
Okay, so that's what, 32 years away. That's pretty close, actually, demographically speaking.
Generation and a half.
Yeah.
So, and the next thing, no matter what the government does now, it is too late to significantly change the overall trend because of social attitudes, says demographers such as Gu Baochang. I'm a really good pronunciator of Mandarin Chinese. Yeah. A professor of demography at Renmin University in Beijing.
Well, yeah, that I'm not so sure about, because the Chinese have this habit of like ordering everybody to have babies, and they do it. They can turn on a dime because it's so traditionally so autocratic. So I question that. Okay. That they cannot change, that it's too late. But okay, go on. So they're saying that they're going to have 1.3 workers per retiree by the year 2050, whereas they have 2.8 today per retiree. Right. Okay. So
exactly. So the next quote we've got here: "They should have lifted all birth restrictions before 2010," says Bao Chang. "Whatever steps they take now, China's low fertility trend is no longer reversible. In 3 decades, 1/3 of China's population is predicted to be over the age of 60. Now, I think that's actually higher than what they're predicting for Europe, but I could be wrong at that. At the very least, it's in the same ballpark.
Yeah. I mean, well, the thing is also, the Chinese cultural attitude was that girls had to go with the dowry, and also boys were always preferred. So what they wound up doing with the one-child policy is they wound up aborting or outright killing girl babies, so that they would have boy babies. And now there are like these villages, I understand, where there are all men and there are no women, which is catastrophic, obviously. And that just
they're accelerating. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's a double whammy.
Yeah.
Not only are you just reducing the births, you're also I'm just describing what we already can figure out logically speaking.
Yeah.
I think it's also to your, and you kind of hit on something there. I was also reading elsewhere. Sorry if I've forgotten the source of it, but I think it's like the variations between regions on the demographic birth rate. So the magic number for everybody to know is 2.1 births per person, or per
woman.
Per woman is your healthy replacement rate. Most of Europe is below 2.1 right now. Yeah. I think most or many of the regions are all below 2.1,
Oh
but
no,
some are
they are all, and I think that Italy is like 1.1 or something like that, something insane like that. Yeah, but they're
Oh
all
yeah, for
below
sure.
2.1. Yeah.
Oh, I was talking actually about China. All like in China, like I think all the regions are below 2.1, but most are like severely below
Oh, okay,
2
great. Okay,
2.1.
but
And
that's the thing
but you're
because
right in Europe too.
y-
Europe, I think France is in the best shape at like 2.
yeah, and actually no, I forgot. I forgot, and we should have prepared, but we're lazy. But anyway, the thing is, see though, is that it's a here's the problem. See, neoliberal economic policy, capitalism, quote unquote, or the kind of corporatist capitalism that currently exists, demands that people have like a boatload of kids and constant growth, constant growth, constant growth. But it actually makes sense for the population of human beings to start leveling off. You don't want a geometric progression of population because where does it end? You want it to be leveling off, right? We were, before the show started, we were talking about Japan. And Japan right now is at something like 125 million people from a peak in 2010 of 128 million people. And it's projected to level off at about 83 million people by the year 2100. Okay, so that's basically a drop off of 40% of the Japanese population. Now, that would seem to me a sensible thing because what will happen is, that, of course, that the population will drop off, but then it'll start rising again, and it'll be like an ebb and flow kind of situation, right? Because we've had this enormous tidal wave of population growth due to principally better medicines, and greater lower infant mortality rates, because the infant mortality is what really affects a population growth. And the infant mortality rate has severely declined in the last 200 years. And that's what's created this population boom over the last 200 years. In 1800, how many people were there? There was something, if I recall correctly, there were like worldwide something like 500 million people. And by 1900 is a billion. And now we're up to what, 8 billion or something like that? So it makes sense that that this big wave will be followed by the tide receding, if you will. But capitalism, especially neoliberal capitalism, demands that growth, 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 and that means population growth, and that means importing populations from other more I don't want to say more fertile regions, but just regions with more people. I think that's fucking crazy. And it's the problems that we're having in Western Europe and North America. Well, we're seeing them now. And I think that the only population that is sensible about it is Japanese, who are saying no to migrants. We'll just, muddle through and have a shrinking population.
We'll use robots to take care of it. And then we'll just deal with it. I mean, I'm kind of not really joking. It is part of the strategy.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. What's interesting is when you talk about this idea, like there's a natural sense of like populations should decline for a variety of reasons. It's like this brings back the Malthusian, I think it's Malthusian argument from the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th. The idea was, there's going to reach an endpoint of human population that it will need to decline. Otherwise, you're going to get these catastrophic disasters. And for the past few hundred years, people have always said, well, that never hit. We never hit that. It never happened. So, they try to say that argument is bullshit.
Oh, yeah. The argument was that there wouldn't be enough arable land to feed this population, and so that there would be, the population would starve to death. That was the argument, and it turned out that advances in agriculture were such that that kind of starvation regime did not happen. The arable land that we have is more than enough to feed even 50% more of the population than we currently have. So yeah, that's a non-issue.
Right, and I think you also mentioned up another good point is like, yes, there is a certain have a lot of advances, particularly in medicine, to keep us alive longer, and that certainly affects the world overall, but particularly the European countries. But I think the other thing we're realizing, particularly in Africa, is left to their own devices, the population would never have gotten as big as we think it is. I mean, think it's going to be, excuse me. Part of the reason it's this massive explosion is because we just have this natural tendency to want to ship various healthcare related items, food to starving countries, whatnot. There are natural environmental factors which would keep these populations in check.
So we shouldn't send them penicillin? Fuck you guys, Africans, die already. What?
Let me make the evil argument here. It's like, well, when we're looking at what's going to happen to Europe, right? Because you're right, the idea of growth is essential to neoliberal economics, and when neoliberal political social ideology is, hey, everybody's the same man and everybody can be interchanged very easily, what's going to happen is that surplus population from Africa wants the wealthier lands of Europe. They want to have jobs there. They can't do more in Africa, so they're going to come over, and then the leadership says, this is a very good thing. We should encourage this. Africans are just, blushing Germans at the end of the day.
Just slightly browner Germans.
Slightly, Germans who
got a suntan.
Yeah, exactly. Who don't know how to use their tanning solutions. Yes, you are creating a problem that will come back and will, cause damage to you. I will dare say, yeah, you are creating that double whammy.
Yeah, well, I think that the Malthusian issue is moot. It's been proven. It's demonstrably not a problem. I think the problem of Africa and India, to a lesser extent, and the Middle East certainly, of these exploding populations. And again, I have to emphasize, because people always think that the reason that the average lifespan was so low previously was that nobody got to live to the age 70. And that's not the case. The reason the average lifespan was like, say, 55, and today it's 70 something. Why was 55? It was because so many children died. That's the issue. Because, in terms of mortality rates, childhood was like the most dangerous period in terms of mortality. Childhood being basically 0 to approximately 12 years of age. And there is actually like a dip between puberty and the age of 30, which makes complete sense, because infirmities that would kill off those children, what would happen was that those parents would never be able to have children anymore, and so that gene would not be passed on. Whereas children who die under the age of 5, the parents have the ability to have another child, and potentially that child carries a gene or a deficiency such that will be passed on to future generations. That's why demographically, there's always been a dip. High mortality of children between 0 and 12 years, progressively falling with every year. And then between the ages of 12 and 25, 30, almost 0 deaths from congenital or inherited diseases. And then after that, after the age of 30, then you get a rise in genetic or congenital diseases that kill off people. For instance, breast cancer. You see, most women get breast cancer after the age when they can have children. And that makes sense, because if they were to have breast cancer before they have children, well, then that gene that caused it, or that combination of genes that caused it, would have been killed off and not passed on to the next generation. Okay, but so the problem is that with all these medicines, you have all these young people being 0 to 12 years old, who are surviving even with congenital defects, because modern medicine can solve it. So the issue becomes sort of like a moral problem. Do we allow these children to die, like in Africa or like the West? And who's to decide which child dies and who survives? We just had that issue with that the kid, what's his name, Alfie, in the UK. Which was creepy as fuck if you think about it, because basically the UK government essentially starved and dehydrated that child to death. So I don't know how to answer that problem. You see what I'm saying?
Well, what's interesting about that case, which I think is a little bit different from the whole question of what we should be deciding or not about Africa, is that Alfie case is with regards to the health system of a country that is administered to its own citizens. Mm-hmm. That in theory, you, through your parliament and its administration of these systems, you have some sort of control on it, right? So that is an abuse of the fundamental system itself, the political system. What we do with regard to Africa is a bit different. What we give to countries outside ourselves is a matter of out of the kindness of your heart kind of thing.
Okay,
Should we donate?
so should we just cut donations to Africa? Say to them, well, you can't have penicillin, you can't have anti-malarial drugs. Should we do that?
At this point, I would say yes.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. That's pretty black pilled. You
I am very black pilled on that because as I had mentioned before, you are creating the seeds of your own destruction at that rate. If you continue to, as it were, feed the fuel that will create a population explosion that will want to increase on particularly Europe. Because then it means that you will be destroyed demographically speaking.
My silence is mulling over what you're saying, which is completely accurate, but it's pretty goddamn cold. I mean, politically, it's a non-starter.
I don't even know that that is true, that it would be a non-starter. I mean, in some groups, it's a non-starter.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's easier
You think that Mama Merkel would go for that? Like, let the Africans die so that they don't invade Europe?
Well, let's tie it back to the demographic. Mama Merkel, because I've been trying to figure out Mama Merkel for years. It's been a challenge. Mm-hmm. I have many theories ranging from, she's a true believing Lutheran to that 0.25% of Polish blood in her is actually subconsciously creating or administering revenge on the Germans on behalf of Poland. So I have multitude of theories on her. But I think so my one governing theory on this, let's say she's a true believer in neoliberalism. In one way, shape, or form. Her idea, she's facing with the demographic crisis in Germany. Germany is amongst the worst in terms of refresh rate. Right. That's what happens when you encourage your men to, dress as robotic maids as their fetish and to encourage it. Sorry, Germany. That's just one of those things.
No, and have the
population
women,
decline.
The women dress up as men. Have you ever been to Germany? The women are all short-haired and dressed in man clothes. It's creepy. But
there's a variety of things in Germany that are interesting, to say the least. Interesting population declining strategies. So, but needless to say, that's her dilemma. She's like, okay, Germany is the economic powerhouse of Europe. In some regards, it's the center of Europe, and where the EU kind of just follows our coattails. So I'm faced with this demographic decline in which I need workers. And so my solution to this matter is to simply say, keep the bodies coming, right? Be they from wherever. So of course she's going to let it keep going. She doesn't really care, to a certain extent, who's working as long as they're working. And the joke, ironically enough, though, is, as I'm sure you're aware, last I read, migrants actually are a net drain on their economy.
Yeah. They're a complete drain. And they're never going to add anything beneficial to the economy. It's foolish to think so. But, I lost my train of thought. I was going to point out something. But about the whole population thing of Africa. Africa is clearly going to become a problem. And it's, like you said, it is a self-created problem in the sense that we're the ones who cause the problem, and the Africans are going to overwhelm us being the Western democracies. They are already doing that. We are seeing shit in Italy. Jesus Christ, you saw there are these areas in Italy where it's just like Senegal, and it's just so creepy because you have like these, beautiful Italian buildings and architecture and what have you, 19th century stuff. And it's just overwhelmed by Senegalese or Nigerians or whatever the hell, right? Well, okay, we've talked about this. We're both in agreement that Europe is lost. Okay.
Now, what's interesting, because I want to tie it back to China, because in theory, China is going to be in a very, admittedly different causes, but in a very similar situation to Germany in the sense that we created this demographic decline for reasons. What the reasons are is kind of irrelevant, and we got to fix it. So China is going to be interesting what their strategy is. Are they going to be, let's do the migrant thing that Europe does, or is China going to say, we'll figure out another solution? Are we going to go more of the Japanese route? Why I bring that up with China is because, one, it's not a true democracy by any real stretch of that term. Yeah. And two, and this is to me an interesting question. To what degree, even though the Chinese are communist, are they in reality mutated nationalists. Now, this is actually a philosophically interesting question for me, because you can take it a number of ways. One, what is China really doing now relative to what communism tells them they should do? That's one less interesting way, but it still has its teeth. The other one is to say, was Maoism, and arguably as it's a version of Stalinism, was that inherently built in nationalism? In other words, is China just a Nazbol country that our Nazbol friends really want to see succeed? And will they succeed on terms that are different from what the Europeans will do?
Well, no, but I mean, you got to keep in mind that communism is just not a facade. It's just like sort of like the current polish of the Chinese box, if you will. China has always been the same. They are intensely nationalistic, intensely xenophobic, and intensely autocratic by nature. I mean, Hegel talked about the Asiatic cultures. I mean, for a reason, the Asiatic despot, as he called him. China has traditionally organized itself under one man who has the Hegelian sense of complete freedom, and this pyramid going down, right? In terms of freedoms and responsibilities and all the rest of it. It's an autocratic regime. It always has been. It always will be, because that's the nature of the Chinese people. This communism shit fit in perfectly. The Leninist, Maoist communism shit fit in perfectly because it appealed to their basic nature, their basic autocratic nature. Do keep in mind, the Chinese shipping, Chinese sailors were much more advanced than their European counterparts in the 15th century. But I forget which emperor who basically ordered all the ships to be burned because he wanted to concentrate on the countryside and screw trade and screw foreign navies and shit like that, and they did it. Mm-hmm. Okay, I forget the specifics of it. You'll have to read it for yourself.
No, I know the story. Yeah, for sure. They had gigantic ships compared to the European ships. They were ready to explore.
Yeah, I saw a comparison. Models built of the Niña Pinta and Santa Maria, the Columbus's ships, compared to one ship of the Chinese, and it was laughable. It was like an aircraft carrier compared to a little dinghy. It was just absurd, right? The Chinese were much better sailors, and yet, and they should have, by all rights, conquered the Americas. But this emperor decided, fuck that, and that was that. Ditto with the one-child policy, several hundred years later, of course. But there's this story. In the 19th century, the emperor declared that only the emperor could use vermilion ink. Okay? And that diktat was followed to the letter across the entire country. And I read in some novel or somewhere that if it didn't expose, if that diktat had been imposed in Europe at the same time, if Queen Victoria had said to her British subjects, only I can use vermilion ink, just about half the population on principle would have started to use only vermilion ink. Okay? I mean, that's the difference between the two cultures. And so I think that the Chinese could very potentially say, every woman who stays home will get like an income, and the more babies she has, the better for you. And we'll give you supplements, more money, something. Or just say outright, we order you to have more children. I would not be surprised if they do that, and I would not be surprised if it works, because the Chinese are like that.
What's interesting is some European countries are actually using that strategy. France, Poland, and Russia are. Mm-hmm. I think all three have actually seen some improvement in their birth rates as a result. I mean, it's not like, oh, we're all above 2.1 now, let's go home and party. But it's getting better. For them, it's kind of getting better. But that is an interesting consideration, because in theory, that article is say I don't have all the the mechanics behind it. They're trying to say no matter what you do now, you're fucked. So will the Chinese kind of overcome? Hard to see. But I think, to me, even independent of can we get the population back up, it's whether or not they do, to your point, like what the Japanese did was say, like, what, to a certain extent, we'll accept the lesser population. We'll figure out other strategies to kind of get to where we need. The reason I say that is because I've seen, people may know I do a lot of work in the tech space. A lot of the automation with regard to manufacturing. All of that spend, that AI spend, that
Hmm.
whatnot, that's anticipated to be heavily concentrated in North America,
Hmm.
specifically the United States, to the point where I've seen like Deloitte reports, which is saying that in terms of competitive advantages,
Hmm.
American manufacturing is going to be number one in the near future because of this. And that Asia, their spend and their ranking on that measure is actually going to be declining, particularly because China, I guess China's attitude is we have people, we'll throw people at the problem.
Well, that's
Uh,
always been there. That's always been the case with the Asian countries compared to the European countries. That's why the European countries had an industrial revolution. There weren't enough people to do the tasks necessary, so machines were invented to do those tasks. That's the source of the European advantage. And this is historically like this is the case. But I want to go back to the Japanese issue that I'm fascinated by, because I'm fascinated by the Japanese equanimity on the one hand and Western economists. I mean, I'm thinking of Paul Krugman specifically, who's my bet
yeah.
Nora. Paul Krugman has been, screaming for years, decades now, that the Japanese GDP is flatlined, that they have like a lost decade or two or three now, and he keeps going on and on and on about this. But of course, a flatline growth of GDP you would think that that's normal or expected from a population that is flatlined or declining. Okay, and so it seems to me that mainstream economists they foolishly think that everybody is the same, and just importing more people, and keeping the numbers up will improve an economy. And I think that actually, if you start looking at the economic output of the Western democracies, right, that have been importing more people, but their GDP has not been growing as much. Now there are a lot of other factors, of course, that like everything from like the fact that the 2008 global financial crisis was never really solved, and so we've been puttering along for the last decade, right? To other issues, but I wonder, and I'm just throwing it out there, I wonder if the fact that we are importing populations has led to us superficially our population expanding like good little liberal democratic capitalist societies, but the GDP is not matching because the population that we're importing is just not capable of fulfilling the economic diktat of these economists. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yes. So in other words, you're not going to have a one-to-one correlation with
Right.
population growth and
Basically.
GDP.
Yeah.
Now, but that's interesting is because that's the whole focus on GDP to me is interesting in part because it's a manifestation of what are your goals of success? What are your terms of success, right, in these countries? Because if you look to Japan, you'd say, okay, hey, declining, you're not declining GDP, but flatline, whatever, they suck.
Hmm.
But if you look at Japan, quality of life, length of life, still among the top in the world without really big challengers. So one begins to ask, well, who benefits from the high GDP growth?
Yeah.
Well, high GDP growth invariably is a manifestation, largely of like equity holders, and hey, I'm going to get wealthy off of this, economic prosperity. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to get an equal share. Yeah, some people are going to do a little bit better, others not so much, and the degree to which your GDP success is a manifestation of, hey, what's going to be the return on my capital investments? Well, then that's a much more concentrated group of people who are going to gain from that. To your point, because that population isn't going to be directly correlated to that GDP growth, what it's saying to me is, what, if I have to throw a lot more bodies to be grist for the mill to get like 15 versus 13%, growth in my portfolio, so be it. I don't give a shit. And I don't really give a shit if the rest of you are going to be declining. What's funny, whenever I read things like from Cato, they're trying to argue like for, hey, the global economy and globalism is great because overall a lot more people are out of poverty. Now that's a broad issue. It's like, yes, a lot more people are going to get 2 rice bowls a day rather than 1. I'm being caricaturish, but you get my point. What that really says is like, hey, for those few countries who've had concentrated success, you're going to get a decline, but hey, on average other people are going to be doing better, so you should suck up and enjoy it. You're a good global citizen. That I think is going to be a continuing trend, that you're going to have this, overall growth for sure, but it's going to be at the cost of developed nations. It's like, yeah, not all of you are going to come through with us, and we don't give a shit, right? I mean, we're all global. I just care about my global friends and my, who have like the same kind of cushy jobs as I do, and we eat at the same nice restaurants, and we don't have to worry about the shit you worry about.
Well, yeah. But for me, I look at it at a different point of view. It's okay. I look at it from a point of view of morality and what constitutes the good life. I mean, okay, Western philosophy has always considered what is the good life the central question, right? And to a greater or lesser extent, each of the great Western religions has tried to answer that, right? Now, we are living in a post-religion world. We are living in a homo economicus, if you will. And, money, economic output is the only measure of value in our current society. GDP good, up, positive, it's up 3%, 5%, 6%, 10%. Great. GDP down, ooh, sad face. But there's more to life than GDP. There's more to life than how much money you make. I mean, in my own case, I've had the opportunity to make a great deal of money, but I would have to live a kind of life that I didn't want to live. And I made the rational decision that I was not going to do certain things that would make me boatloads of cash, but would make my life a misery or make me go possibly insane. Okay, not to say that I'm completely sane now, but you get my point, right? The point I'm trying to make is that, see, you cannot reduce a quality life, a good life, to simply a number. But that's apparently what our society has decided, that only GDP, only average income, only your poverty level or what have you, only that can define whether you're leading a good life or a bad life, because we've lost the instruments to measure the goodness and worth of a life that are not numeric. We can no longer say, oh, this is a good life or this is a bad life, and without resorting to numbers. And when you reduce everything to numbers, it becomes just an issue of money. It seems so to me. You see what I'm saying?
You see what I'm saying? No. I think we're in agreement. I just, I think we're phrasing it and emphasizing a little differently. I completely agree. Yeah, that the idea that, first off, like if you follow the neoliberalist logic, we should all become investment bankers.
Yeah, basically.
That's the goal. And trust me, I've been in consulting and I've lived near and next to investment bankers. You don't want that life.
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now, you don't want it. For those of you who have a chance at it, don't take it.
Yeah, I almost became an investment banker. Yeah, and it was a scary proposition because it was like, you were just a machine. Yeah.
You work 120 hours a week, and there's a chance you might piss in a bucket to avoid the lost productivity of one of the big.
But you're going to be in a nice suit. You're going to be wearing an awfully nice suit. Yeah.
You don't even have the time to spend your money. I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
But the reason I kind of bring that up is not only should we not all be bankers, the thing is not all of us can even be bankers. So yes, there is certainly, the good life has more than just money, but there is still a material, necessity to life. We still have material bodies, and we do need to make sure that, you can, feed, house, and clothe yourself at the very least in a, acceptably middle class income. The thing is, in addition to people behaving as if money is only everything, those people who really take that to heart are creating a situation where not only is money important to me, but even your basic little middle class income is not my concern anymore. So you get the double whammy, right? So for me, the good life is making a lot of money, and that also is probably going to entail seeing your life decline, maybe just a little bit at first, maybe noticeable, maybe enough to not necessarily kill you, but at least enough to make you desperate. And that's just something that you have to deal with. And if you dare say that I shouldn't be importing cheap African labor to make it a little easier on me, I'm going to call you a bigot too.
Yeah.
So I mean, sorry, I feel this is probably my left-wing experience talking. That I'm a very, I still have Catholic sympathies, but part of me has also said there's also a material element to life. You can't forget it, right? And that's kind of blending into all this. And the thing with Japan is Japan still makes sure that a lot of its people, in addition to just a spiritual well-being, they actually have a material well-being as well. I mean, they live long, not a huge amount of poverty. All that's that's related.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I'm of two minds about a whole host of issues. Like number one, for instance, longevity. Okay, I'm 50, right? And already see decline in my physical ability and mental ability. You always do. I mean, once you're past the age of 20, 25, you start to notice little things that don't work as well as they used to, right? Large and small. But the thing is, see, I look to the future, and I don't want to live to be 85 and drooling. I don't want to live that kind of a life, you know? I mean, if I get to like 70, 75, and, I realize that the shit isn't working so well, I want it, I want it, the off button, I think that this urge to live for the sake of living is a mistake. And I also think that this desire at all costs to have like a materially successful life throughout, I actually think it's a mistake because in my own case, at least, I've had big ups and downs. And there were times in my life that I was like really, really broke. I mean, really broke. Like when I finished college, right, and I'd moved to Hollywood, I got a couple of gigs and I was doing okay at first. And then things went south for a bit. And there was a time when I had to eat like a 5 pound bag of rice or 10 pound bag of rice. And I had to make it last like 10 days. And because I had the money, I was going to get a check, right? And I looked at the money I had, okay, and I had X amount of money for the gasoline, X amount of money for rent, X amount of money for cigarettes. And the remainder, that was my budget for food. And that was like $5. So I went down to the supermarket and it was like 10 days before I'd get paid. So I went down to the supermarket and I figured, well, what can I get with $5 is the maximum nutrient, right? And I settled on this big bag of rice, white rice, okay? And I took it home and I ate that shit for like, it was like, like 10 days. And what I'd do, I'd go to the Burger King. There was a Burger King just around the corner. And I'd steal the little packets of mayonnaise and ketchup and mix it with this rice. And that was my meal. I had that shit like twice a day, right?
It's like, Jesus Christ, it's like this is like the Vietnamese countryside. I feel like, John Milius is going to come around the corner and shoot you.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is so goddamn funny because I was like flat broke, right? And I was getting these videotapes from this producer who wanted me to do something like this TV show. And I had to do it because I was going to get some cash out of it, right? So I'd be like sitting in this like little lawn chair in my apartment, staring at the TV, watching these episodes with this little Pyrex thing of rice and ketchup and mayonnaise and eating this shit and smoking cigarettes. And that was it. And it was fucking horrifying, right? But the funny thing is that, see, retrospectively, I look at that period with enormous affection because it was a lot of fun. And the point I'm trying to make is, see, that a good life is a life of contrast. And it seems to me that our society is so concerned with stability, with sameness, with just maintaining that level at optimum, at zero, neither up nor down, like at zero, flat. Whereas my conception of a good life is a life that goes up and down. Because when I remember that time, and I remember how miserable I was at that time. Okay, and then I think of the really happy times of my life. Like for instance, one of the best times I ever had in my life was I was at the Bad Root Palace Hotel in San Moritz. Okay, I was with a hot woman and I was skiing and I was there for like 10 days. I had a ball. It was like a high point of my life, right? I ate great, got laid, skied. I didn't have a care in the world. Okay, that contrast between like the very best and the very worst in my life. Well, that wasn't that particular instance. It wasn't the very worst, but it was fairly bad. I felt fairly miserable and pathetic. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that contrast is what makes a good life. But our society seems to think that evenness and having like a plateau life, that's what we should aspire to. You see what I mean? I don't quite understand the current mentality.
Yeah, so I'm of two minds on this issue as well. So I'll start with how I agree. be kind. So I agree in the sense that I think I'll tie two and two together. I think people believe that a life of subsistence is the best, right? So the idea that, and you see it manifested, right, in the social welfare network to a large extent, right? So this idea, especially in like places like the UK, youth unemployment is terrible in the UK, has been for a long time. But the idea there is to say, well, you will make sure we give you enough money on the dole to where, you can kind of just have this sort of steady existence. You can keep on going, and you'll be generally, maybe you'll be miserable, but you'll have a lot of free time, and you'll have enough time to bitch at your parents and pretend that Margaret Thatcher was the Antichrist who was out to get you, and all these good things that Britons still love to do.
Yeah.
And that that it's almost like being a tuber at the bottom of the ocean. That's how they kind of think.
Okay, that's kind of awful, but okay.
That's how they think of you.
I'm thinking of the YouTuber Kevin Logan. He's like the prototypical guy like that. But yeah, okay, continue. So I agree. There's something horrifically empty about that. Is a point where I don't even know that this is disagreement, but maybe it's just a little different perspective. I certainly don't look back on the points of my life where I was kind of, as it were, struggling to get by as something I want to repeat or I remember fondly of. What I do remember about it is, or what I find, in my own life, things that do make me happy is, there's a certain things of consistency I do like. The fact that you have a warm home that's of sizable. It's not super huge, but it's comfortable. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Benway lives in a mansion, 50 rooms. He's got about 100 servants. He's just doing this for kicks. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Anyway, I have a room for every day of the week that we record a podcast. So you will notice a slight difference in the environment. That's a subtle way of me telling you, hey, variety is the spice of life. Enjoy it.
Okay. Seriously. Yeah. I don't look back on the bad times of my life fondly. I was fucking miserable. What I like is the contrast. The contrast between the highs and the lows, the contrast between the lows and right this second, which right now the second is seems to me fairly ordinary. It's like 0 on the setting, and so I think back of the time when I was at minus 20. When I was like I said, sitting in the lawn chair eating rice for the 30th time in a week, right, and watching these tapes and trying to figure out how to do an episode like the episode that I was watching, right. How to write this episode like the producer wanted to. I remember that misery, which was like minus 20 on my dial, and I contrasted to my current 0, which is I'm neither unhappy or happy at this particular moment, right? But I think to myself, that contrast makes me feel very good about how life is today. It's not that I look back fondly at that period. It's at that period, the difference from now and that period makes me appreciate the moment. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is reminding me of, it's slightly different, but it's reminding me a little bit of I don't know if did you ever watch As Good as It Gets?
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's a scene that just makes me laugh all the time when there are all the wounded people in a car going somewhere. It's Jack Nicholson, Helen Hunt, and Greg Kinnear. They're all Greg Kinnear and Helen Hunt are talking about the misery of their life, and it's like, oh, it makes us look on the best of things. And I think Jack responds like, no, it doesn't. Some people have happy lives with summer parties and noodle salad. The thing that gets me going is not that, I have it so bad, but that you're pissed off that others have had it so good. Yeah. And that, and that idea is certainly an element of contrast. For me, I look at it two ways. I don't think contrast isn't necessarily how I think of it, but I think of the striving is certainly an element I do probably look fondly on. The idea that I wanted to get to a certain place. It took effort to get there. I remember how it took me to get there. I was happy that I succeeded in getting there. At a certain point, even that has diminishing returns, because I could jump even further. Like I said, you and I said we could have become bankers. I mean, that could have been even more striving. who would gain the most money or whatever here or there. There's a certain point where I said, there's diminishing returns there. So now the things that I most enjoy, when I look fondly on, like when I've discovered a new movie I enjoy, when I read a certain book, when I make a meal that turns out successful and delicious, going to see this, that, or the other, like you said, potentially going skiing, all of that. Those things, which in and of themselves, if you took them alone, are kind of banal things, right? But they're enjoyable. They're the little zest that makes things entertaining. And to a certain extent, like I think to myself, like if I could, because this is the question you're kind of asking, like would you rather have a life where you have like negative 20 and positive 20 and going around and around, or do you want, like you said, maybe it's certainly not at zero constantly, but like a constant, like 5 or 6, something.
Oh,
that's
no,
that's
no.
that's the meaning.
You're asking if I prefer a life that's been like plus or minus 20 or plus or minus 5. For me, the answer is obvious: plus or minus 20. Because I want there to be contrast. That's how you can tell where you're at. Okay. And you don't obsess about problems. Look at the special snowflake problem that we have today in American campuses and in American youth. They had it so good constantly. And so for them, the trivial problems, microaggressions, which is laughable, they have they throw a shit fit over it, over using the wrong fucking pronoun or some shit like that, right? But it's because they've had it so fucking good that they don't appreciate it. When, like I said, I have actually faced the prospect of starvation. That's what I was basically telling you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, if somebody is to call me like, by the wrong pronoun or something like that, I wouldn't even notice it, because I've had to deal with much bigger issues, much more serious issues. And I think that the problem we have of oversensitivity to trivia is precisely because of that, because of the lack of contrast, the lack of highs and lows. People who grew up during the war, during the Second World War, right, where there were rationings, right? People who were old enough to go to the war, who saw their friends shot. After that, we got the 50s, which is what was basically the 50s. People wanting stability and no more high contrast life, okay? And of course, they weren't offended or anything by trivia. But you see the point I'm trying to make.
I do, and to your point, and this is the unending cycle probably we experience, with a generation that had that intensity and wanted the stability will create offspring, to tie it back to demographics, that without that experience want to create the tension experience. So we created the 60s, or I feel like you created the movement of time. No, I mean, you know what I mean. We created the culture of the time, and certainly that we feel it to this day. No, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not necessarily just trying to say you're full of shit there, Coach. I'm just trying to square it with my general idea of like there's a certain bourgeois lifestyle that I enjoy, which in many ways was considered by a lot of the people who I think are complete assholes, specifically like people like the boomers, as like, oh, it's a horrible life. Why would you ever want that? Calm, peaceful.
No. I like a nice, steady, easygoing bourgeois life. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing a bourgeois steady lifestyle. What I'm saying is that a full life is more fun when the volume dial gets like spun around, and when it's like really loud and really low, when it's like when it's all over the place. I'm talking about not specifically. I'm not interested in having like an alternative lifestyle. I mean, I prefer shit. You've seen how I dress, right? I dress Brooks Brothers and jeans. That's me. Okay. The notion of being like alternative or something like that, for the sake of it. No, I like bourgeois life. I don't have a problem with it at all. But what I am saying is that a life well lived with big highs and big lows, and the willingness to risk those big lows, because that's another thing. You see, in my own situation, when I was talking about how I was like broke and all the rest of it, living in LA, and I didn't know anybody, and it was a miserable life and all the rest of it. I didn't have any money, didn't have many friends, and stuff like that. Well, it was my decision. I went out to LA without any contacts, and to try my luck at screenwriting and making a living as a writer. And it was a decision. It was a risky decision, and it had a semi happy ending. I mean, I pretty much got what I wanted out of the place, even though I hated Los Angeles. I always have hated Los Angeles. I think it's the city of the devil, but that's for another conversation. But the point I'm trying to make, see, is that, see, you hit bottom when you make decisions that entail risk. Okay, a riskless life, a steady life. I don't know. I mean, or perhaps it's a temperamental issue. I don't know. I mean,
Well, I think partly it is because I think I wouldn't say I'm a non-gambler by any means, but I would say you have more of the gambler's temperament than I do. And I don't mean that as a criticism.
no, 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 no. I know what you mean. It's not even like an issue of gambling, of wanting to play for the sake of playing, because that's what gambling, the connotation is, that they're at the table just because they like the thrill of it. It's not so much that I like the thrill of it; it's that I want to do the things that I don't think I'll have an opportunity to do ever again.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I think they're related because it's because part of the reason I'm kind of keep pinching at this, and hopefully people find it interesting, is I think this talks about, or at least gets to, I think, tendencies in a right wing or conservative mindset, right? Because there is an element of the conservative mindset, and by this I mean the small c conservative. I don't mean the Ben Shapiro's of the world. Don't let's not go onto that fucking train. But that idea of like there is a certain desire for some kind of stability. There's structure and there's order and there's value to that. And we like that, but there's also this tendency, which you exhibit even more than I do. But I even see some elements of it myself to say there's the big vision, right? Mm-hmm. Doing that risk, building something. Empires are built, as it were. Both of those tendencies kind of coexist in a lot of people, I think, in our world, and they are kind of at tension with each other at some time. So I'm kind of curious to see how people kind of deal with that.
I'm thinking.
And I don't think it's an easy question to kind of resolve. It's almost like, I think the way you kind of I think about it is like when you build, this is going to be such a shitty metaphor, but let's go with it. When you build a sandcastle and you really get it the way you want, you have pride and ownership in what you've built. And you want to see it last as long as possible. There's that risk in building it. And, you can take this beyond sandcastle. You build your house, you build this, you now have investment in it. Once you get that point of investment, then you kind of are more and more interested in making sure it kind of lasts. So maybe part of it is like there's a certain period when the risks are necessary and there's a certain period when they're a little bit less. I mean, this is just portfolio theory 101 I'm giving you. So they always say invest in the riskier stuff when you're young, and when you get older, move to bonds.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. Because I'm trying to think, and I realize that in my own case, all of my life, I have not had a problem of investing a great deal of time and effort in one thing, and then when I see it doesn't work out, just discarding it. I have never had a problem holding on to an investment when I don't think it's paying off. Okay, especially insofar as relationships, or insofar as things that I've done. Projects that I'm doing. I have a whole host of projects that I worked on for quite a while that I realized they're not going to work out, and I dropped them, and I didn't feel bad about it. Okay, of course I felt bad about it, but I did not let myself be pulled down by my investment. I didn't not allow myself to sink along with the investment. You see what I'm saying? It only happened to me once. It only happened to me once in one particular issue that I'm not going to get into. But what happened was that for several years, I held on to a project that I was working on, and I could not let it go because I'd invested so much time and effort into it. And I held on to it way past the sell-by date. And it dragged me all the way to the bottom. And but it happened the one time, okay, and not early in my career, unfortunately. It was sort of like in the middle of my years. I don't want to get into it because it's like a personal issue. But the point I'm trying to make is that, see, I think that lesson sort of like taught me, if it's not working out, just drop it. I think that that's
No,
basically
no,
it.
no, that's interesting. And no, I don't think you went too far on a tangent at all because you had one case of prior commitment syndrome, right? Which is like a lot of people have that. It's like I've invested too much time to give it up, kind of thing. And part of the reason I'm gonna see if how nice a bow I can tie this back to demographics, because it's what's interesting to me, right? Is the more money you have, in this idea that maybe you're opposed to risk taking or you want some sort of consistency. The wealth, maybe it's not universal, but it just feels that way. The wealthier we are, the more we have it good, the less we want to take on the burden or the risk of children. I don't know if that's 100% true. It feels true.
Wait,
I
wait,
know
wait,
a
can you
lot more
repeat that?
people.
Can you repeat that?
The wealthier you are, the
Yeah.
more successful you are, the more excuses you find to avoid the risk of having children. I see it so many times in the people I know. It's like, oh well, we have so much money we want to spend on this house or this kind of thing. We're into these hobbies. We want to travel. We don't want to give that up. Hey, well, hey, we love our dogs. Our dogs are our kids.
Oh God,
It
that's fucking
feels
creepy. Yeah, I
you've
hear
seen
that.
it though. You told me you've seen it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I have. It's creepy as fuck. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and what gets me about that is like because I'm trying to tie this all together, right? Because like having children is a big fucking risk in a certain way, right? And it's like we don't want to take it after a certain, and it's ironic enough because like the wealthier you are, the more you can bear that burden. The less you want to take the chance of someone
Well,
taking
no,
it away from
no,
you.
no. I think that in my own case, for instance, I had children late in life. My daughter is currently almost 5, and I had her when I was 45, and my son was born when I was 47. Um, and I was like looking forward to it. I really wanted both kids, and I want to have more. As a matter of fact, when I was younger, I was not prepared to have children, not prepared emotionally, not prepared financially. And now that I have a larger portfolio, if you will, I'm more than happy to have more children. So I'm not sure that, at least in my own case, I don't see that generalization you're making is so obvious. Okay.
Well, I'll put it this way. I think like why is it then that the less
No,
developed
it's that
countries
I think it has to
seem to
do
be
with
having more kids?
selfishness. And also, look, it also has to do with the fact that women have been socialized to think that they should prioritize a career over children. And by the time they realize that that's a mistake, it's too late for them to have children. And so they sort of like explain away their lack of children by saying, oh, it's too hard, it's too complicated, I like my life like this, and whatever. They grow old. They grow, I mean, you've seen old people who are set in their ways and they don't want to change things. I think that that's actually a deliberate choice. And I think that children prevent that inflexibility. I mean, I know in my own case, I have to be on my toes because of my kids, because they make demands on me that do not allow me the luxury of becoming calcified. Whereas if you're single, if you're a single woman and you're 35, 37, your odds are pretty good you're not going to have a kid. So you're like, screw it, I'm not going to have kids and stuff like that. And because of that, you can allow yourself to be calcified. You don't have to maintain the flexibility that would be required if you were to have children. You see what I mean? And I see that actually. Actually, now that I think about it, I know women who are in their 40s with children and without children. And the women who are in their 40s with children, especially more children, they're more robust, more flexible, more not merely energetic, but they are more, they can change and adjust to a situation much more quickly and less traumatically than childless women. Excuse me.
I think so, and so yeah, I agree with you. I do think there probably is, in addition to telling people career is more important than family, you're creating a problem there. But I also think the success it creates a kind of selfishness in a way, because as what you're describing, with what I think part of the reason that women with children can tolerate more is because there's nothing more destabilizing to a certain extent than having a kid around. And like for me, like even just having, when I was younger and say, hey, can you watch, our little ones for a second while we go do something. That was the most traumatic 5 minutes of my life. Like I was afraid I was going to drop the kid every 5 seconds. Like, no, don't touch that. Don't touch that. I feel you get a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like a callus, right? Around that. You feel like once I've survived this and I'm able to kind of deal with it, no fucking challenge you're going to throw my way is going to really throw me off, as opposed to, to your point, it's almost like anti-fragile.
Right.
There's a when you're alone with your own devices, you're like, I have created a situation where I don't have to face certain extreme stresses on the system. So God help me if I have to go out and like someone, says, "Hey, pretty lady, nice thing you got there." It's like, I can't deal with that, But if you have a kid, it's like, I don't give it. You almost like, you have an I don't give a shit attitude, which is healthy.
Exactly. Yeah. And well, that ties into my special snowflake metaphor of people having it so good and so placid for so long, and not having had ups and downs. The lack of flexibility, the lack of bending. I mean, you take a stick, right, and you keep on bending it back and forth. It'll retain its flexibility, but if you let it just dry out, you bend it once and it breaks, right? Well, that's actually not true, but you know what I mean. I'm using it just metaphorically speaking. The constant flexing, the constant up and down helps to have a better life. I look at guys who are my age. I'm 50, right? And I look at some guys my age, and these guys are fucking calcified. I mean, they can't handle shit. Okay, a little thing deviates from their very structured lives, and they have a hissy fit. In my own case, I'm like, oh, the car blew up. Oh, shit. Is it insured? Oh, it is. Oh, it's not. Oh, God damn it. And, what's for lunch? I don't care. That's one of the advantages of that kind of flexibility, that you don't allow the little things to affect you. And, go ahead.
Let me postulate something similar, but let me postulate a little differently. And I'll tie it even right back to the big demographic question. Do you think the putting Europe through a kind of crisis like this is a way of tempering the steel, which has hitherto been allowed to be just weak and brittle? By that, are we by testing the mettle of Europeans on a number of fronts? Be they demographic invasion or financial problems, or the whole idea of the European Union being dictatorial, whatnot. Do you think putting the stress on that system is going to create a situation where people are going to become stronger as a result?
No. Well, first of all, I dispute that this is sort of like, there's an underlying premise to your question that it's a conscious decision. I don't think it's a conscious decision, okay, by anybody. It's just a series of different decisions by different actors for different reasons that have led to this situation, okay?
Oh, let me just modify it right there. I don't think this is a conscious situation. I do think it's creating a situation where you can test it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so aside from that fact, you're asking whether the particular stresses will bring about a stronger Europe after. No. I think that this will break Europe. I think that we're seeing the end of Europe. It's going to be overrun by people who are not European. And everything that those people inherited will be washed away by these new immigrants. None of us is going to be here around in 300 years, right? But if I could make a bet, I'd say in 300 years, the Cathedral of Notre Dame will no longer be standing on the Ile de Saint-Louis in the middle of Paris. I can guarantee you that. It will have been wiped off. And everything that was Paris will be gone. Okay? And ditto with London, and ditto with Berlin, and ditto with all of it. I mean, shit, I'll bet you anything that in Berlin, one of the first things that the Muslims are going to do is they're going to get rid of the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. That's right there by the Brandenburg Gate. They're going to get rid of it. Yeah, that's one of the first things they're going to do. And the Brandenburg Gate, they might hold on to it because it's so iconic. Ditto with the Eiffel Tower and ditto with Big Ben. But just as like in Italy and Rome, the Roman Colosseum is intact, right? But it'll be gone. Everything else will be gone, okay? And it will be overrun by a foreign people. Just as like, for instance, to go back to the Roman thing, People say that in Italy there are Italians, but those aren't descendants of Romans. Those are descendants of Greeks and North Africans, the people who live in Italy today. The Romans, they're gone. They're long gone. The people who were Roman, and the people who were Roman could recognize these Greek and North African peoples who were invading their island, their peninsula, and they didn't like it. Okay, but it happened, and they got wiped away. The Romans are gone. The Germans, the French, the English, the even the Irish, all those people, they will be gone. And it's a tragedy, but that's the way of the world.
My natural tendency is to agree with you. So my other natural tendency is to argue against myself to be
Well,
to be healthy.
well, yeah, because I'm
The only
saying
thing-
this is fucking sense to you. That's why I'm the coach, because I'm talking sense.
Yes, but the doctor is here to fix the situation.
Okay. Okay.
So here's what the doctor said. The doctor reminds us that we can never fully predict situations and complexities to the system that we have hitherto not yet experienced. And the question ultimately is going to arise on this: how brittle is the population right now? Will it flex under stress, or will it break? I think that in certain countries, the tendency certainly looks like it's going to just break and give in. I don't know 100% that will be the case. I think there are factors in the east of Europe for sure, and the west that are kind of undetermined right now. I mean, I think the fact that you get certain people like who constitute, Identity Europa, and even in a minute way, being a force that'll be different from that. I don't know how successful they will be. I just know that it's there. I could also easily believe that, in 300 years from now, Notre Dame remains, but is an Orthodox church populated by Poles or Russians or Slavs. That I could also envision kind of happening after
I don't think
years
so.
of
I don't
war.
think so. Yeah, I think it's going to be Muslims for sure. But we'll see. Okay, so on that note, we're going to call it a podcast, and that's kind of like a depressing note to end the podcast with. But oh well. I'm Coach Red Pill, and for Coach and Benway, I've been joined by my co-host Dr. Benway. So long to everybody, and thank you so much.
Thank you, and do yourself a favor to make this a little bit more happy. Have some kids. Have 2.2 kids.
2.2 kids. Yes.
Figure out how to do that. It's not my problem.
Yeah, figure out how to make the fractional child.